The forest closed in from every direction. Imagine standing on a narrow trail in the Teutoburg Forest, in what is now northwestern Germany, in the autumn of the year 9 AD. You are a Roman legionary, the finest soldier the ancient world has ever produced. You have marched thousands of miles. You have fought in Spain, in Gaul, in Judea. You carry 20 kilograms of kit on your back. You believe, because every general and emperor has told you, that you are invincible. And then the trees erupt. Screaming men pour from the undergrowth on both sides. Javelins tear through the autumn rain. The man beside you goes down. The man ahead of you goes down. And somewhere in the chaos, you begin to understand a terrible truth. The army that conquered the world has just been led into a trap. How did Rome's greatest war machine walk straight into its most catastrophic defeat? And what did that disaster reveal about the limits of the legion? To understand what happened in those dark German forests, we have to go back to where the Roman army began. Not the polished, professional force of the imperial era, but something much older and far more fragile. The earliest Roman army, dating back to the Age of Kings in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, was essentially a citizen militia. Men of property armed themselves at their own expense, mustered when Rome needed them, and went home when the fighting was done. The richest citizens served as cavalry. Those who could afford armor and shield formed the heavy infantry. The poor stood at the back and hoped for the best. This was not a standing army. It was a seasonal one, and it reflected the Roman Republic's deep suspicion of professional soldiers, men who might owe their loyalty to a general rather than to the state. For generations, this system worked. Rome fought its neighbors in central Italy, the Etruscans, the Samnites, the Latin League, and slowly, painfully, expanded its territory. But the system had a fatal flaw. The moment Rome encountered a truly capable enemy, the cracks showed immediately. In 390 BC, a force of Celtic Gauls under a chieftain named Brennus swept south through Italy, shattered the Roman army at the Battle of the Allia, and sacked the city of Rome itself. It was a trauma that Roman writers would reference for centuries. The city survived barely, but the lesson was unmistakable. A militia army, however brave, was not enough. The response was gradual, as Roman responses often were, but it was decisive. Across the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, Rome began professionalizing. The manipular legion emerged, a flexible tactical formation built around smaller units called maniples that could maneuver independently on broken ground, unlike the rigid Greek phalanx it replaced. Soldiers began to be paid. Campaigns grew longer and pushed further from home. Rome was evolving from a city-state into a military empire, and its army was evolving with it. Then came Hannibal. In 218 BC, the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps with his army, elephants and all, and descended into northern Italy. What followed was the most terrifying stretch of Roman military history. At the Trebia River, Hannibal lured a Roman army into a river crossing in winter, flanked it on both sides, and destroyed it. At Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, he staged the most perfectly executed ambush in ancient history, hiding his entire army in fog along the lakeshore and annihilating a Roman column of 15,000 men in less than 3 hours. The Romans barely understood what was happening before it was over. And then, in 216 BC came Cannae. Cannae deserves to be spoken slowly. On a flat plain in southern Italy, Hannibal faced a Roman army of roughly 80,000 men, the largest force Rome had ever put in the field. His own army was smaller. By every conventional logic, Rome should have won. Instead, Hannibal executed what military historians still study today as the perfect battle of annihilation. He allowed his weaker center to bend backward under Roman pressure, drawing the legions deeper and deeper into a pocket, while his stronger Iberian and Celtic cavalry destroyed the Roman horsemen on the flanks. Then the cavalry swung around and hit the Roman rear. The pocket closed. 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. Soldiers packed so tightly they could barely raise their swords. Men suffocating in the crush. It was a slaughter on a scale that would not be matched in the Western world for over 1,000 years. And here is where we need to dispel one of the most persistent myths about the Roman army. The popular image of Rome is of an unstoppable military machine that simply ground down its enemies through discipline and brute force. The reality is far more interesting. Rome lost, repeatedly and catastrophically, and it was precisely those defeats that made the army great. After Cannae, after Trasimene, after the Allia, Rome did not surrender. It reformed, it adapted, it rebuilt. The Roman army's greatest strength was never invincibility. It was institutional resilience, the capacity to absorb catastrophic failure, study what went wrong, and come back stronger. The reforms that followed the Hannibalic Wars were sweeping. Scipio Africanus, the general who would eventually defeat Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, introduced Spanish short swords, the gladius, adopted from the very enemies who had embarrassed Rome in Iberia. He trained his cavalry aggressively. He understood that defeating Hannibal required learning from him. At Zama, Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against the master himself, disrupting the Carthaginian elephant charge, pinning the infantry and swinging cavalry around to encircle the rear. Hannibal recognized the genius of it. He later called Scipio the greatest general who ever lived. But the most consequential transformation of the Roman army came not from a single battle, but from a social crisis. By the late 2nd century, soldiers now gave their loyalty to the general who paid them, not the state that deployed them. Picture life inside one of these reformed legions. Dawn begins before the sun rises. A Roman soldier in a permanent garrison marches 20 miles in 5 hours with full kit, a feat of conditioning that would exhaust most modern infantry soldiers. He practices sword drill against a wooden post twice the normal height and weight, conditioning his body to find the real weapon light. He builds. Legions constructed their own fortified camps every time they stopped. Ditches, palisades, organized streets within the walls, a portable Roman city that could be assembled and dismantled in hours. He eats wheat porridge and hard biscuit and rarely complains about it. The Roman legionary was not a berserker. He was something more dangerous. A craftsman of violence, patient, organized, and utterly relentless. By the time of Augustus Caesar, the army that emerged from the chaos of the late Republic and the Civil Wars was something the world had never seen. The Augustan legions were permanent, professional, and geographically fixed along the frontiers. Soldiers served 25-year terms. They were engineers, surveyors, road builders, and administrators as much as they were fighters. They carried Rome's legal system and engineering knowledge wherever they marched. The roads they built, the bridges they threw across rivers, the aqueducts they constructed, these were as much instruments of conquest as the gladius. Which brings us back to the forest. In 9 AD, the Roman commander Publius Quinctilius Varus led 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, into the Teutoburg Forest on the word of a man he trusted completely. That man was Arminius, a Germanic chieftain who had served in the Roman army, earned Roman citizenship, and learned everything Rome knew about how to fight Romans. He used that knowledge to forge a coalition of Germanic tribes and design a trap perfectly suited to the legion's one persistent vulnerability: its dependence on open ground and organized formation. In the forest, over 3 days of ambush and massacre, roughly 20,000 Roman soldiers died. Varus fell on his own sword. Augustus Caesar, receiving the news in Rome, is said to have beaten his head against a wall and cried out, "Give me back my legions." The Rhine became a permanent border. Rome never seriously attempted to conquer Germanic territory again. The Teutoburg Forest was not just a military defeat. It was a revelation about the boundaries of imperial power. A reminder that even the greatest war machine in the ancient world had edges, and that those edges could be found by an enemy clever enough to fight on his own terms. The legacy of the Roman army did not end with the fall of Rome. It echoed forward through Byzantine military manuals, through medieval cavalry tactics, through the drill squares of Napoleonic Europe, through the standardized logistics of every modern professional army on Earth. The concept of a standing army, paid and professional, loyal to an institutional identity rather than a personal warlord. That is a Roman idea. The principle that soldiers must be trained not just to fight, but to build, to organize, to sustain a campaign across vast distances. That too is Roman. Even the word military comes from the Latin miles, a soldier. So the next time you look at a modern army, its ranks, its standards, its engineers, and its logistics trains, you are looking at the long shadow of the legions. They were not invincible. They were something better than that. They were adaptable. They were institutional. And when they failed, they learned. What happens then when the empire that built this machine begins to collapse from within? When the legions that held the frontiers start to fracture along political fault lines? The story of Rome's fall is just as dramatic as its rise, and it begins, as so many catastrophes do, with a civil war.